Hi, I'm Congressman Steve Scalise, and we're going to kick off this roundtable, which is part of a series that Leader McCarthy has opened up to start talking about different pieces of President Biden's reconciliation bill, which includes numerous taxes that would be very detrimental to America's economy, but especially detrimental to families. And it's hitting the hardest hit people are going to be lower income and middle income people. And today we're going to be featuring the heat your home taxes that are in this reconciliation package. And again, if you look at this multi-trillion-dollar bill, it's thousands of pages long. There are a lot of people across America that haven't seen all the details of it, and that's why we are trying to highlight just what is really in the bill. And as negotiations still go on to make it bigger, to spend more money in Washington, families know inflation that's hurting them is caused by the spending in Washington that's already been done, and that inflation would only get worse if we added trillions more spending and additional taxes that would hit families. And when you talk about the heat your home tax, what we're specifically talking about is this methane tax, the natural gas tax, as well as the clean electricity performance plan that are embedded in President Biden's reconciliation bill that he's trying to ram through Congress as we speak. They've been trying to get an agreement on a deal before the president jets off to Europe. They still don't have a deal, and we're trying to get more and more Americans engaged to know what's in this bill and how it would hurt families. When you think about gas prices, President Biden was just asked last week at a town hall meeting, what is his answer to lower gas prices? And he said, I don't have a near-term answer. Well, Mr. President, if you don't have an answer for how to lower gas prices, the good news is we do. And in fact, many of the bills that we've authored, and some of those authors are here, that would actually lower energy prices for families and get us back to producing enough energy for America. We were exporting energy all over the world. Today, we're seeing prices through the roof for everything from gasoline. But now, if they get this heat your home tax, this would hit lower income families the hardest. We all heard President Biden say, don't worry, if you make less than $400,000, your taxes won't go up. The bad news is that promise gets broken with the heat your home taxes that President Biden is trying to impose on families. Because as we look at it, maybe another cold winter, imagine if you're going to be paying over $240 a year more in your electricity bills if President Biden gets his way. We as House Republicans and some of our allies in the energy industry are trying to prevent these taxes from hitting those families. And so with that, let me go around to a few of my colleagues as well as some of our guests that are here that can talk to specific sectors of the industry. But I'll go to our friend from New York, Nicole Malliotakis, who's been working on this.
Well, thank you, Representative. Thank you. I don't know if this is working, but thank you, Minority Whip Scalise. I want to thank also Leader McCarthy and all my colleagues who are here today to talk about this very important issue. I also want to thank Claudette Duff, who is one of my constituents and represents Integrated Senior Services, to really talk about how this is impacting. I could certainly, as the representative, talk about how this is impacting New Yorkers, but I think it's best to hear it from those individuals, particularly those who represent our senior population. Cost of living in New York is out of control for multiple reasons. And unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of those same policies that have driven up the cost of everything in New York being adopted now at the federal level. And I think that my responsibility is to sound the alarm and show how this has impacted New York and why we need to stop it on the federal level because it will certainly affect the rest of the country. But under President Biden's plans, the United States would need to build and operate over 3,600 offshore wind turbines alone, to power New York City. And certainly this would cost U.S. taxpayers more than $95 billion. And look, I'm someone who believes in alternative energy, but it needs to be diversification here. You can't just completely eliminate different aspects of the energy industry. And so I believe in diversification, which is why I supported the construction of the Keystone Pipeline. Just to give you an idea of how this is affecting New York currently, in August of 2021, electricity prices averaged 22.6 cents per kilowatt hour in New York City, which is 56.9% more than the national average. Why? Well, in New York, they implemented a lot of mandates and taxes as they're looking to propose here on the national level. They also totally took offline Indian Point Power Plant, nuclear power plant in New York City, which is part of that diversification puzzle. And when Governor Cuomo said he was going to do this, we all raised our voices and said that this was going to increase energy costs on New Yorkers, and that is exactly what we're seeing happening now. Again, this is before Biden's plan. In August 2021, the average price for New York City residents for piped gas was $1.32 per therm, 4.3% more than the national average. That is why people all around the country are saying that not only the Keystone Pipeline would have been good to add to this commodity, but also the 11,000 jobs it would have created. But also, one last thing I want to point out is that in 2019, New York was the 6th largest natural gas consumer among states. So we need to have diversification of energy sources to keep up with the demand. These are not high-class problems, as the White House is saying. The supply chain is not a minor inconvenience. It is an inconvenience on every single American family, and we will see that in these winter months if the Biden administration doesn't get serious about addressing this issue. So we need real solutions, diversification of energy sources. We need more supply, not taxation, not mandates, and not regulation. Thank you.
Appreciate your passion, Nicole, and your leadership. Next colleague I'm going to call upon is a leader on the House Energy Action Team. We all know just how involved in the energy industry the state of North Dakota is, but also Kelly Armstrong's been a leader in that industry. And in fact, one of the bills that we talked about when we gave a response to President Biden, who said he doesn't have a plan, one of the number of bills that we do have is Kelly's bill to greenlight the Keystone Pipeline. Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Scalise, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about all of the terrible policy that exists in when we actually end up seeing text in whatever the plan is. But I think it's important to figure out where we come from, because it's already bad, and it's self-inflicted. First day in office, they cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. Then they do everything they can to help Russia greenlight Nord Stream 2. They ban permitting on federal lands, and then beg OPEC to open up production. When it says he doesn't have a near-term plan, he had one arrow in his quiver, and it was to beg OPEC to open up the floodgates. It's a definition of outsourcing our guilt. We are not lowering worldwide emissions by doing this. What we're doing is putting American companies, American workers, and American energy producers at a disadvantage on the world stage. It's a uniquely incompetent ability to do something that is expensive for consumers, hostile to domestic energy producers, and terrible for American workers. And what are they doing now? They're doubling down on it. North Dakota, as you said, is an energy powerhouse. We have already got notice that we are going to increase our heating bills by up to $200 this winter because of these policies. Now they want to add another 15% on top of that. If you are an unemployed pipeline worker in western North Dakota right now, and you're getting a $200 increase before they ever pass a bill and add another 15% on top of that, you're pretty angry and you're pretty frustrated, and rightfully so. And we've done this to ourselves. This administration has done it, and it doesn't stop. I could go on. We can talk about going back to 2015, waters of the U.S. At the same time, we're opening up the Clean Water Act to allow states to stop states like from North Dakota transporting their products to market. It's too expensive. It's too cumbersome. It's impossible to get infrastructure into the ground. And we are doing this at a cost to every worker and every consumer all across the country. It's not making the world any cleaner. It's not making us any safer, and it's terrible policy, and we need to continue to talk about it.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Another leader on the Energy and Commerce Committee, in fact, Bill Johnson, represents a district in Ohio. He actually took me out on a fracking site where they do a lot of hydraulic fracturing, producing a lot of natural gas. Bill has one of those bills that we were talking about and recommending to the president to help expedite LNG. But why don't we turn it over to my colleague from Ohio, Bill Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Whip. I appreciate that. And I want to thank the participants that are here today. I can tell you it's you and others like you that are going to spread the word and help re-engage the American people in this conversation. These discussions need to be dining room table conversations with the American people. They need to understand what's coming. You know, something that strikes me as so And nobody in the media talks about it. And this is out of the UN. And maybe somebody said this before I came in. According to the UN's own data analysis, if this rush to green in America, let's say it's successful, and that we reach that goal by 2035, do you know how much it's going to reduce the planet's temperature? 0.137 degrees Celsius 80 years from now. We'll all be dead. That's what this destroying our economy is going to do for the rest of the world. The Biden administration, with these egregious policies, are basically telling the American people that they're going to have to accept a lower standard of living. That's essentially what this all means. This year, Christmas and Thanksgiving are going to be a lot tougher for millions of Americans. It's going to be a lot smaller because prices are going up on everything, from groceries to gas at the pump. We've seen what's happened with the supply chain. There's going to be a lot less stuff under the Christmas tree and in the stockings for millions of kids that have just come through a year of being shut down and locked down. The methane tax and the Clean Electricity Performance Program are just more examples of death by 1,000 cuts in this rush to green agenda that they've got and the assault on fossil fuels. The Biden administration is basically downsizing the American dream for the American people. I think it's atrocious. You know, we talk a lot about inflation. Inflation is a problem, but energy inflation is a crisis. It's a national security crisis because energy policy is national security policy in this country. It gives us leverage on the international stage. It gives us a seat at the head of the table with our friends and allies all across the globe. Do you know why Donald Trump was able to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, like many presidents have promised, but he's the one that delivered? The reason he was able to do that is because we were producing 13 million barrels of oil a day. He didn't have to worry about what OPEC and Iran and other Middle Eastern countries or countries that don't like us were going to do when we made that decision. America can stand guardian at the gate of freedom when we are energy dominant. And this administration is going in the opposite direction. I appreciate you folks being here.
Thank you, Bill. One of those states that produces a lot of energy, not just for America, but all around the world, is the great state of West Virginia. And a member who's been a leader on energy, especially as it relates to the coal industry, is our good friend Carol Miller.
Thank you, Whip Scalise, and it's an honor to be here today. West Virginia is nestled in beautiful mountains between Ohio and Pennsylvania, and we all share abundant natural resources. Unfortunately, starting with the Obama administration and now through to the Biden administration, they're doing everything in their power to cut us off at the knees. Our base load of energy, it's just absolutely ridiculous. We are blessed with coal, oil, natural gas, and in my district alone, I saw what happened with bad policy when my McDowell County had over 100,000 people in it, and after the terrible policy, they're down to in the teens of thousands of people because they had to leave. They had to leave to find other jobs. And it's ridiculous what we are looking forward to at this point. I've long been an advocate for an all of the above program for how we power our country. That makes the most sense. Yes, we want to have some clean energy, but you don't just decide that's where we're going today. So, you know, the reconciliation bill fails to meet our energy needs. We're going to put 90,000 people out of jobs if we continue with what we're doing with the gas and oil. The fact that we cut off the pipeline, as Kelly had said earlier, and suggested and then stood beside Russia and their pipeline. It just blew my mind that we would do something like this. And I look at the country of Germany, and, you know, by the year 2025, they will have spent $580 billion to make electricity that's going to be so much more expensive and 10 times more carbon intensive than what France is doing. You know, we need to learn as we go that this is not the direction we want to do. And so the backwards looking policy is not where we want to be. We need to have our good, strong base load of energy and move forward with innovation as we keep on going. So that's just a small smidgen of what we all need to say and what our country needs to understand when their bills go up, when they're colder or we have brownouts, because you cannot depend on solar alone or windmills to do what we need to do in Fargo, North Dakota when it's 20 below zero. You know, it just doesn't work.
It's a warm day in February.
Well, I'd like to also address, would you like to introduce Debbie Lesko?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Another leader in this fight from Arizona who's been a champion on all of the above energy is Debbie Lesko from Arizona.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, and thanks to the participants, my colleagues and the other participants, either here or virtually. This is a really important issue, and Americans really need to know what's happening and what the Biden administration and the Democrats are doing to America. If it's not the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is a crisis, or the open borders, since I'm from Arizona, people flooding across the border illegally, or grocery prices skyrocketing, gasoline at 7-year high. People are paying more and more out of their pocket. But then on top of that, now we have the Biden administration and Democrats that are proposing a natural gas tax. Natural gas is already high. In fact, the Energy Information Administration has already predicted that people are going to pay 30% more this winter for home heating costs. So on top of that, we have President Biden and the Democrats that want to raise it even more. This makes absolutely no sense. Why would the Biden administration and our colleagues across the aisle decide, okay, let's produce less natural gas and oil in America, but Biden calls on OPEC to raise their energy production instead of us. They closed down the pipeline here, the Keystone pipeline, but yet he approves the Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Germany. This makes absolute no sense, and I hope the American people understand what Biden and the Democrats are doing to your pocketbooks.
Appreciate that, Debbie. And as we speak, there is a final vote going on the House floor. So we're going to break for 5 minutes, and then when we come back, we're going to hear from our panelists and then have a roundtable discussion. So we'll break, go vote, come right back. Thank you. Finish with votes so we can just get right into a healthy discussion. We have a number of friends from the different industry groups who really see the frontline challenges as we look at some of these policies that have come out, let alone the policies that are being proposed, like President Biden's home heating tax. Why don't we start with Jim Wilkes, who's the president, director, and co-owner of Texland Petroleum. Jim, you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. My name's Jim Wilkes. I graduated from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Petroleum Engineering in 1978. And after 6 years with Sun Oil Company, I joined Texland Petroleum LP in 1984 as a petroleum engineer. I became part owner of Texland in 2001 and am currently president. Texland is a private, independent oil and gas company headquartered in Fort Worth. My company employs 81 people in Fort Worth and our field operations in the Permian Basin of West Texas and southeast New Mexico. We also indirectly employ about 25 people every day to provide contract oil field services to our company. We operate about 1,200 wells in 40 different projects and drill approximately 20 new wells each year. I'm also chairman of the board of the Independent Petroleum Association of America. IPAA represents America's independent oil and natural gas producers. Our members are the primary producers of the nation's oil and gas and account for 83% of America's oil production and 90% of its natural gas output. The association represents smaller private producers, but also larger public companies. These independent producers are a driving force in our economy and support roughly 4.5 million jobs in the United States. IPAA member companies are innovative leaders and broke the code to usher in the shale oil and gas, natural gas revolution in the United States. The proposals put forward in reconciliation, from changes in tax policy to the proposed establishment of new and unprecedented fees on industry at every level, and threats to cease federal lands production, would have a dramatic impact on IPAA members. All things being considered, would result in higher gasoline prices and higher heating costs for communities across the United States. Over the last few years, investment in oil and natural gas has decreased dramatically. When you add in some of the tax provisions that are being considered in Congress, and when you eliminate deductions for ordinary and necessary business expenses, it cuts the internally generated capital that a company needs. And then the industry cannot respond when it's needed, and that is what we are seeing today's higher prices. Thank you for inviting me to join today. I'm happy to answer any questions on industry tax provisions, including the proposed methane tax, particularly from the view of a small producer.
Thank you for that, Jim. We'll now bring in Claudette Duff, President and CEO of Integrity Senior Services. Claudette, you're up. There we go. Is Claudette?
She went to go vote too.
Yeah, all right. There we go, we have Claudette. All right. We can hear you.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
I had to change devices.
All right, you're on now.
I'm on. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Am I on two devices?
We're seeing you perfect, and we hear you fine as well.
Okay, good. Thank you. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today on behalf of the most vulnerable in our society, seniors. A 2019 Harvard study showed the population over 50 to be 34%. More and more seniors are losing their homes to foreclosure. The rising homelessness among people over 50 is a national crisis. Increased inflation and the potential impact of rising energy costs this winter has given me cause for concern for the seniors I served in my community. The September CPI showed the highest increase of all the components is food, shelter, and energy. Implementing the methane tax could add to these rising costs, and I'm concerned that vulnerable seniors are not being considered. While I believe we must battle climate change, I am also painfully aware that most seniors have little financial wiggle room. Seniors in my community are having difficulty paying their copays and other health-related costs. In fact, this situation is so dire that my agency has been waiving copays, and most recently, I've started offering pro bono mental health services to seniors. Further, we're all aware of the incredible high cost of medication that's not covered by insurance companies. These most vulnerable among us make daily compromise in order to survive. Any possibility of an added cost to them must be seriously considered. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. And now I'm happy to introduce a dear friend, someone who helped work on the Hill and helped make Congress work for a number of years before she went on to ultimately now become the CEO of the American Exploration and Production Council, our friend Ann Bradbury.
Thank you so much, Whip Scalise, for having me today, and thank you to all the members and panelists here also. AXPC is the national trade association that represents the largest independent producers of oil and gas here in America. Our companies and our workers, over 1 million strong across the country, provide the energy that fuels our economic growth, supports our quality of life, and lifts people around the world out of poverty. With technology and innovation, we brought America from a place of energy dependence to energy abundance. And thanks to that technology and innovation, America leads the world in emissions reductions. So we know that American-made energy and world-leading emissions reductions can go hand in hand. As we talk today, it is important to remember that over 1/3 of Americans struggle to pay their energy bills, which is why we need policies in Washington that support affordable and reliable energy and oppose harmful policies that make energy more expensive and less reliable. Policies that punitively and unilaterally target the U.S. oil and gas industry will do just the opposite. For example, a new tax on natural gas and the so-called Clean Electricity Performance Plan. These policies will make the natural gas that Americans use to heat their homes and cook their meals significantly more expensive. The natural gas tax being proposed could cost the American people over $9 billion and about 90,000 jobs across the country. Estimates show that some estimates show that such a tax on natural gas could increase the average consumer bills by about 17%. And this is on top of the inflation and increased costs we're already seeing. These proposals will certainly hurt America's energy workers, but the impacts will be felt far beyond, down to the workers, their families, the small businesses, and communities across the nation. And those that will be especially hard hit will be those 1/3 of Americans who are already struggling to pay their energy bills. So thank you so much for hosting this important conversation today, and I very much look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Ann. And now I want to bring up Kristen Granier, who is the Senior Director at the American Gas Association. Kristen.
Thank you, Mr. Whip, and thank you to the members for inviting us to be here today for this very important conversation. As Mr. Whip said, I'm Kristen Granier. I'm Senior Director at American Gas Association. We represent over 200 local energy companies throughout the country that provide clean natural gas to over 180 million Americans and 5.5 million businesses. I'll start off with some good news first. Natural gas utilities have a proven track record of reducing emissions, with distribution systems declining 69% since 1990, while adding new customers and adding about 780,000 miles of pipeline throughout the country. We also invest billions of dollars in efficiency programs that help customers save money, reduce their energy consumption, and curb emissions. Despite all of this work, the reconciliation package has prompted numerous bills and proposals that make it harder for the industry to deliver affordable energy to customers and will likely raise costs to those 180 million Americans and 5.5 million businesses, all without proving real environmental benefits. One of those proposals is why we're here today, the methane tax, or it's been appropriately named, the natural gas tax. By AGA's estimates, the tax will increase natural gas bills at a minimum of 12% per American family per year. While this might not seem like a lot to most, this is the difference between buying groceries and paying to heat your home this winter. The tax is designed to fine companies based on the amount of natural gas they produce or transport, not on actual emissions. And although distribution will be excluded, the tax assessed upstream would flow directly through the gas utilities to the consumer, which is how we've calculated the cost impacts here. The tax, which will be sent back to EPA to implement this proposal, it won't go back to our companies to actually shore up those emissions, would actually reduce incentives for natural gas companies to invest in infrastructure upgrades that we continuously use to enhance safety. Lastly, this natural gas tax alone would require about $2.5 billion additional in LIHEAP funding to help these families this year make it through the winter heating months. The only other, or a few other proposals, the Zero Home Emissions Act, which would provide incentives to provide incentives for the installation of electric equipment regardless of whether that reduces emissions or not. We'll also see this as increasing costs for consumers. And then lastly, the Clean Electricity Payment Performance Plan, which has been mentioned. It won't directly impact the direct use of natural gas, but again, the commodity prices will increase based on this, which will flow directly to the consumer. So it really can't be said enough that these proposals will likely necessitate rate increase for consumers throughout the country, both families, small businesses, and power generators. We've been saying this, that it's not a Republican versus Democrat issue. This is an American issue, and it's going to affect Americans throughout the country, both families and businesses. So thanks again for having us. Happy to answer any questions and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you, Kristen. And as you point out, the percentage increase, at least 12% increase in people's electricity bills that they'll pay if President Biden gets his wish on this heat your home tax. I think it's interesting that he's going to Europe at the end of this week, and it seems like that's one of the motivating factors to try to rush something through Congress to raise taxes on families, especially heating taxes. But let's think about where he's going right now. He's going to a part of the world where right now in Europe, you're seeing dramatic increases in natural gas prices. In fact, in Europe right now, where President Biden's going, they're seeing natural gas prices 6 times higher than where they were a year ago. France alone, prices of natural gas have doubled. And where we've been talking about ideas that would actually lower the cost of natural gas, if he's going over there to talk about how this is going to save the planet, let's keep in mind America was reducing carbon emissions by using more natural gas, by doing things in a cleaner way. America's actually got some of the best standards in the world, and so if you are going to manufacture things, you should want to make more things in America instead of where President Biden is going. To Europe, maybe he's more concerned about what his friends in Europe think. He should be more concerned about what families here in America think and how it's going to affect them. Because when they think about things like the Paris Accord, they exempt China, who's the largest emitter of carbon in the world. And they're exempt. And in fact, China's building about 300 coal plants this year. When you look at how things are made in America, we do it a lot cleaner. And so maybe we can have that discussion about this inverse relationship between reality of families paying more, especially lower income families, when you talk about this heat your home tax. And when he looks at what he's trying to model our country after, European prices that are dramatically higher, and China being exempt from all of this so that they get to manufacture more things when we have a supply chain crisis, and how all this factors in. If anybody wants to take a piece of that.
I would just say, this isn't new, right? We're dealing with several countries, as the president is going over there, that banned the importation of frack gas from the U.S. So they were banning gas that was cleaner to produce from their ally, so they could get dirtier gas from Russia because the word fracking was a bad word. It's exactly what happened. So maybe instead of going over there and trying the failed Obama policies of we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to put American companies at a disadvantage on the global stage, maybe they should say, hey, one of the reasons your gas prices are probably higher than they should be is because of the failed policies you have all had for the last 10 years. But we don't have those conversations in reality because that's not what they're about right now. And I think it's important to recognize these aren't new fights. They're just getting worse right now.
Exactly. And what he should be doing is helping our friends in Europe that are now struggling to make it through a very cold winter because of this rush to green and their weather-dependent energy sources. he should be telling them how America not only met but exceeded our climate agreement goals. Even though President Trump backed us out of the Paris Climate Agreement, we're the only country that was an original signatory of the agreement that has met or exceeded our emission goals. That is a positive statement that should be out there. And he should be telling our friends and allies how they can accomplish the same thing rather than throttling what American energy companies are doing.
You
Carol,
know,
you had something.
I was just going to say, between 2005 and 2017, the United States reduced their emissions more than the next 12 countries combined. You know, people don't talk about what a good job we've done and how great we are doing with our natural gas. And Kelly, when you were talking about getting the gas from Russia, you remember they cut off the Ukraine when they were a little slow paying their bills. So what's to guarantee that won't happen again to the other countries that are depending on that dirty gas?
Ask Scotland.
Steve, I have a question
Yeah,
for
Debbie.
Kristen. You had said, what dollar amount do you think you're going to need more in LIHEAP funding to help low-income Americans pay their bills? I missed the amount, and I think that's really important.
It is, it's about $2.5 billion.
$2.5 billion, and that kind of ties into what Claudette said when she's advocating for seniors. I have a large senior citizen population in my congressional district, and I think of my 92-year-old mother who is very frugal when it comes to her electric bills. And in Arizona, we produce electricity the most by natural gas. And so when the Biden administration and the Democrats pass this bill that will increase taxes on natural gas, guess what? You know, the prices are going to go up, not only for the young families who are struggling to pay for grocery bills and gasoline to go to work and things, but also for those senior citizens. And in my community, in the Sun Cities, particularly in Arizona, we have groups that help pay for electric bills for those folks. So this is a really, I don't understand President Biden. I really do not understand, even if he's doing things for political reasons, it seems like it's against what would work for him, you know? Like, let's go across over into another country instead of taking care of our own country here. It makes absolutely no sense to me, and I think it doesn't make any common sense to most Americans.
And it seems that he doesn't understand either, because again, just last week he said, I don't have a near-term answer, which is perplexing that the President of the United States would say that he doesn't have an answer to one of the greatest challenges and crises facing families, especially low-income families, when we do have those answers, and the answers aren't complicated. It's getting back to the things that work. I'll go back to Nicole, and then I want to ask our producers, both Ann and Jim, about how this is affecting production in America and investment in America.
Yeah,
Nicole.
I just wanted to point out that home heating costs are projected to rise as much as 54% for some households this winter, and that is before the president's policy of a natural gas tax. And I think Claudette really captured the true impact that this has on every American. I think a lot of people up until now didn't really put together that correlation between the increased spending that we've seen, the inflation, the lack of energy independence, and how it is how it actually, the end user is affected by that. And for the first time, I think we're really highlighting that. And Claudette, I want to thank you, because you not just mentioned the importance of the heating costs, but you actually went into other areas, and those other areas are all impacted by this, because you know what? It's if you're buying food, if you're anybody that's manufacturing anything in this country, anybody that's transporting anything that's been manufactured in other countries, the medicine that you mentioned, the transportation for all these goods, all affected by these rising prices, which at the end of the day increases the costs on those items for consumers. And so Claudette, if you work with seniors day in and day out, what would a 54% rise in heating costs mean to those seniors? I know you also have services where you have 3 seniors, for example, living in one household to kind of cut down on those costs of living and giving them some independence to live in an actual, home on their own as opposed to an assisted living. And what would that mean for those homes that you provide for these seniors? You're on mute.
Yeah,
You're on
unmute
mute.
yourself there, yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. Sorry about that. It would be devastating. Right now, we are struggling because the seniors that share a home also share the energy, also share the utilities. And many seniors cannot afford it. They can afford their portion of the rent, but many cannot afford the rest of it, sharing all the utilities. And right now we are in a crisis with that, where we have many seniors that want to live in our home, but they really cannot afford it. Even if they can afford the rent, they cannot afford to pay for the other expenses.
I just find that so incredibly sad, that seniors are going to be priced out of living in New York City, but that they can't afford the property taxes if they own, they can't afford the rent because that's being passed on as well. And then now to see the energy costs, they're going to have to choose between food and heat. That's ridiculous, and we shouldn't be encouraging that.
Yeah, clearly you see the impacts on so many people across this country that's leading to higher energy costs for families. Lower income families especially are feeling not just inflation, but now on top of inflation, they're seeing and being faced with even higher energy costs because of President Biden's tax. But if you look now at the impact on jobs in America, because it's going to increase carbon emissions globally because they're going to shut down production in America, but they're going to increase production. When President Biden begs OPEC and begs Russia to produce more, they are producing more because we're producing less. They don't have the standards we have, so you have increased carbon emissions. But I do think it's important to talk about the jobs, and that's why I want Ann and Jim to touch on it, because I know I represent Port Fourchon, which is the hub of deep water drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. It's had a chilling effect on any kind of real investment. You just don't see the normal multi-billion-dollar a year investment in exploration in America in the Gulf of Mexico, even though there are big reserves because of all of these radical policies. What do you see in terms of jobs, both Ann and then Jim?
So, I think that's a great question, and I'm also actually going to bring this back to cost a little bit too, because I want to look back historically at what we've seen with energy costs over the last decade. And as costs for almost every household good over the last decade has increased by double digits or more, your energy costs over the last decade have decreased, and that is because of the shale revolution and because of domestic production and made in America oil and gas. And that is something that we should be building on and supporting. I think that, what you see from a lot of the large upstream producers is, we are coming out of uncharted territory in terms of what we saw with the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty as to what long-term demand was going to look like for our industry. Thankfully, we're coming out of that. Demand is ticking up. But now we're faced with a great deal of regulatory uncertainty, and these are long-term investments that these companies need to make. And so it inserts a whole new level of uncertainty into these companies' business plans so that they can't they can't make the investments that they might want to make given the regulatory uncertainty that they're facing. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that the jobs that we support pay double the national average. These are high-paying jobs with great benefits throughout the United States, from Appalachia to New Mexico. And these are really good opportunities and jobs that we should be fighting to keep here at home.
We're talking about energy, but there are also other things. There are over 6,000 products that are made from natural gas, from clothing to, I wouldn't want to be in a surgical unit without any plastic.
Yeah. Right. Electric cars, just a lot of the materials that are on basic things that we use every day.
And with the taxes that they're putting on, we've got to remember our farmers as well, and what they're charged for cows, and the various types of taxes that are going to be felt by our farmers.
Absolutely. It really impacts every part of the economy, every part of our quality of life.
Let Bill Johnson hit this, and then we'll go to Jim.
Hey, I have a question. You know, one of the most common things that I hear, I was down in Houston last week talking to the Energy Stream folks at a natural gas summit in Houston, and I heard over and over and over again, and I've heard it even since I've been back here this week. What's your opinion? What do we do about the investors that are throttling back on investment in fossil fuel technology because they have bought into this rush to green so heavily? I mean, they've got these ESG scores, and companies are being held hostage, being basically told, you either get on board with this rush to green and diversify your energy portfolio, or we're not going to fund your projects. And I mean, what do we do about that?
So, you know, I think first and foremost, like, we need to make it clear that oil and gas has a long-term future, and that even under the IEA's sustainable development scenario, 50% of the world's energy sources are going to come from oil and gas in the year 2040. And that's under the sustainable development scenario, which models Paris commitments. So oil and gas is going to be needed to meet the world's energy demands for decades to come. And I think that we need to acknowledge that, both in terms of our climate policy, but also in terms of, you know, the reality of the fact that, you know, that oil and gas companies don't necessarily need to, you know, turn into renewable companies to face the future, because, you know, our product will be needed and will be around for a long time to come. And I think, you know, the other thing to remind, you know, folks is that, you know, it is actually the oil and gas industry that is an integral part of any solution to climate change in the long run. The technologies that are going to be needed to address this issue are going to come from the oil and gas industry. And so we need more investment, not less investment. And you know, we see the results of cutting off investments, you know, in, you know, when the world is not providing sufficient, when policies dictate that, you know, the world does not get the oil and gas and fossil fuels that it needs, we see the results, and that is energy shortages and spikes in prices, because we're just not ready to live without them at this point in time.
Jim, you want to address that as well?
Sure. Thank you. My feeling on it is, you know, all of the uncertainty that's created makes you doubt whether you really want to invest, you know, in this business in the long run in the United States of America. That's really kind of the bottom line. When you have uncertainty in tax policy, regulatory policy, access to federal lands, and just an all-out assault from the regulatory agencies on our industry, it creates doubt. And anytime you do that, it's going to make people pull back from investing. That's just natural. And, you know, so I've talked to many different independents, small independents, and they wonder, what kind of future do we have? I was just talking to a partner this morning. He says, have you ever just thought about selling out? You know, it just gets more and more difficult, more and more onerous, you know, to operate here in the United States. And so that's where we are right now. It's just tremendous uncertainty. And when all you have left is, you know, internally generated capital, you know, because they cut off, the banks cut off loans, and capital markets cut off our industry because they don't want to loan to us anymore, then you end up with the only capital you have left to invest is internally generated capital. If we're going to tax all that away and contribute it all to methane fees and things like that, and there's not going to be much left to invest.
And of course, at that point, it becomes a major national security problem for the United States of America, because we go back to those days in the 1970s if we keep going down this road where we then become more dependent on Middle Eastern countries, on Russia, on countries that use energy as a weapon, as leverage. We've seen it before. We were immune from it when we became energy dominant. We don't want to go back to those days, but if we use that, if we lose that capital, the human capital especially, if those jobs go away and these industries go away, they're going to go to other places in the world. we're just not going to be able to get them back here. That's what this fight is all about. I think, Kelly, you had a final question.
And I had a question for Kristen, because I think this is a place where it's different necessarily from production to, like, natural gas. We've had, I don't know how many hearings on the Clean Futures Act, but there's nothing in the Clean Futures Act on permitting reform or litigation reform. And if you're trying to invest in an oil company, that's one thing, but we spend a lot of time talking about Keystone. But we had Dakota Access, you have Enbridge in Minnesota, you have Enbridge under Michigan, you had Williams going into New York, you had Duke and Dominion. I mean, how in the future, without solving some of these problems, we're the geographic center in North America. We produce a lot of things we don't consume there. I need you all to get our products to market. What can we do to help? Because what can we do to help you all get the infrastructure in the ground?
Well, the infrastructure investments are such a huge deal for us that's what we've been doing to bring down these emissions. I mentioned the 69% emission reduction since 1990. That's been thanks to going in and upgrading our pipelines, upgrading that infrastructure. That not only helps safety, but, again, emission reductions. Our companies have been at the forefront of that, since the beginning, while still delivering reliable and affordable natural gas to customers and pushing energy efficiency programs to those customers. So, we have been making the investments needed. And, one of the examples that we've been talking about is at the state level, at the state PUCs, they're unlikely to approve rate-making cases for infrastructure investment when prices increase by about 10%. With just the natural gas tax, if it's increasing by 12%, they're going to say no to us going in and continuing to upgrade that infrastructure. So therefore, it means no more, the emission reductions aren't there either. So, we need the continued, permitting reform. We need to be able to continue going in and putting in pipelines. And, another thing that we've been really talking about lately is, it's innovation over elimination. We can use these pipelines to, as you said, push other products, renewable natural gas, hydrogen, getting those low to no carbon fuels into the mix. And a lot of our companies are, investing in themselves and in their own projects to do this now. So, as Ann said, that continued investment for innovation is absolutely necessary, along with the permitting reform and, making sure that we're not eliminating one fuel source.
We have somebody else in the room who want to open up for Q&A right now?
Yeah, sure.
Tom Scott, actually, Daily Caller. Was wondering if, from the members particularly, if you had any reaction to the Biden administration mulling this idea of tapping into the emergency reserves. Kind of a sort of radical shift.
Yeah, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a national asset that's really there for national security purposes. It's not to be used as a piggy bank just to bail you out when your failed policies create higher gas prices. The answer is very straightforward, and it's right under our feet. There's energy all throughout America. We saw with the shale revolution, with other advances in American technology to drill in deeper reserves in places like the Gulf of Mexico, other states that wanted to look at the eastern seaboard. We have energy here in America. President Biden, unfortunately, has closed that energy off. So instead of trying to drain what's left of our reserves, we ought to be producing more energy, creating more jobs here in America to take leverage away from OPEC countries, to take leverage away from Russia. So tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is only supposed to be used if we have a national security problem. What we have is bad energy policy by President Biden. SPRO's not going to fix that. Reversing it and putting some of these rules in place and changes in law in place that we've been discussing will solve that.
Emma with Andy News. So you don't have to, for Ann and Kristen, you don't have to convince the Republicans in this room that a methane fee and the CEPP are not good policies. I think what it seems to me what you have to do is convince the Democrats to strip certain provisions out of this broader reconciliation package. The CEPP already seems like it's off the table. We understand now that methane fee is on shaky ground. Is there anything you can say about what engagement you're having right now with Democrats who could be sympathetic to the cause and are saying this has to go?
Well, we certainly talk about it in committee hearings and try to bring up common sense solutions and amendments. Unfortunately, to this point, our Democratic colleagues, at least on Energy and Commerce Committee and in the Energy Subcommittee, haven't really agreed with us. But I think that it's really important to have meetings like this and reach out to the public like we have to tell them the real-life impacts that this natural gas or home heating tax, whatever you want to call it, is going to make on their pocketbooks. And I think that's what pressures the Democrats to change their minds.
Yeah, so, I would just add, from our perspective, we talked to both Republicans and Democrats, we talked to both sides of the aisle. We believe that energy should not be a partisan issue, and we believe that members on both sides of the aisle understand issues related to increased energy costs and the effects that those are going to have on their consumers. So, I would say we talked to both sides of the aisle, and we think that it is important to, be to maintain those relationships with both Republicans and Democrats.
I want to reemphasize what my colleague Debbie Lesko just said, because she mentioned it also earlier. We had a legislative hearing on the reconciliation package, which include the Green New Deal and the Clean Future Act and all of that. Not one single Republican amendment was accepted by the Democrats. This is not a bipartisan discussion that we're having here. We're in some never land of ideology, and I don't know, but it just goes back to it defies logic and common sense why they are trying to assault the only fuel source, fossil fuels, that has lifted more people around the world, not only here in America, but around the world, out of poverty than any other fuel source on the planet. It makes no sense.
I just want to add that both Democrats and Republicans fill their cars with gas. Both Democrats and Republicans go to the grocery store. Both Democrats and Republicans heat their house, have lights in their house, and it's up to the constituents to let their congresspeople know that they don't like the raised prices and the fact that they are trying to make us energy dependent upon countries that aren't our friends.
Kristen, do you want to address that?
Sure. And just to echo what Ann said, we've done outreach across the board, both in the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats alike. As I mentioned in my remarks, it's not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American, energy payer issue. And we'll continue doing this outreach as we've done, in issues past and moving forward.
And look, there is clearly a war on fossil fuels by some of the most radical elements of the Democrat Party, and what we should do is issue a challenge. Because we've heard some Democrats say that they think fossil fuels are immoral. So if they do, then they ought to put their money where their mouth is and stop using fossil fuels. And it'd be interesting to see, if they fly on an airplane to come to DC, if they drive in an electric car, are they plugging that car into a tree? Or are they plugging that car into a socket that's fueled by fossil fuels, which is more likely the case, whether it's natural gas or coal or some other source of energy? The energy has to come from somewhere, and your baseload energy right now are fossil fuels, and we're for all of the above. We want renewables to continue to thrive, but you're going to need to still have fossil fuels, as Ann said, for decades to come. And hence, when Joe Biden says he doesn't want fossil fuels, he's only applying that to America. He said he doesn't want pipelines in America, but he greenlights the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany. He says he doesn't want fossil fuels produced in America, but then he goes and begs OPEC nations in Russia to produce more. So I think people across the country, as they're paying dramatically higher prices for gasoline at the pump, for electricity in their homes, they're realizing the hypocrisy that the very people that are telling them not to use fossil fuels and making them pay more are flying around on jets all around the world to spread this message when they should be coming back here and looking at what we do well in America. Stop beating up America all around the globe. That seems to be the cliche thing to do. The problem is, when you look at other countries, we do it better than anybody else in the world, and that's why we're telling this story.
I think the hypocrisy is what's so frustrating. You see the sponsor of the Green New Deal drive from Cannon to here in not one, two big gas guzzling SUVs, and then come with this, it's going to affect every single American and, drive seniors out of their homes. It's just outrageous.
Whip, you mentioned the war on fossil fuels. It reminded me, this should not come as a surprise because it was President Obama that declared war on fossil fuels in his State of the Union address. I believe it was 2012. If I'm not mistaken, it was either 2012 or 2013. His State of the Union address, when he proclaimed then that one of his goals was to begin to eliminate America's dependence on fossil fuels.
I think it was in 2008 as a candidate when he said he wanted to bankrupt the coal industry.
That's right. That's right.
Well, and I think that's a cautionary tale too. The vast majority of the Clean Power Plan never actually became policy, and it didn't matter. It devastated the coal industry, whether it was in West Virginia, whether it was in North Dakota, whether it was that. And I think everybody who cares about American energy independence, cares about cheap, affordable, reliable energy, needs to recognize that we don't want to fall into the same traps.
Yeah, and as President Biden is flying on Air Force One to Europe, I think it's important to point out that there was not one country in Europe that was in compliance with the Paris Accord. America was reducing carbon emissions without being in the Paris Accord because of the great innovation and technology that America was using not only here in the United States, but we were sharing that with countries all around the world and helping our friends geopolitically so that they didn't have to rely on adversarial foreign nations for energy. And that's been undermined with President Biden's action. We can take one more, but we have one more over there. Yes, sir.
Matthew Foldy with Washington Free Beacon. This is for anyone who's interested. You guys have touched on this, but do you think this is an issue in talking with your colleagues of ignorance from Democrats, where there are not a lot of Democrats representing coal country anymore, or ideology, they're just so hell-bent on attacking fossil fuels in America, or a combination of both, or are there other factors that are leading them to propose these sorts of things like methane taxes?
Ideology.
I think it's ideology. It's, they're just have this goal of all wind, all solar, and any logic that gets in the middle of that, it doesn't seem to compute. I don't understand it because I'm friends with, some of my Democratic colleagues, but they just are so convinced that we can have all of our energy sources just from solar and wind. And that should certainly be part of the mix, as it is in Arizona, but we can't go at the pace that they want us to go. It's not possible. It's not possible to go at the pace that they want us to go, and the technology isn't there yet. And then even, let's say, electric vehicles. As Steve said, you have to plug them in, right? The energy has to come from somewhere. And sometimes I think they don't think about that. They're just like, oh, it's emission free. Well, how about when you plug it in, do we want brownouts, rolling brownouts like California? And how about the critical minerals, the lithium storage batteries, the lithium in the electric vehicles? Where do you think all this stuff comes from? China. And I think Steve has said it very well in the past. This is not Build Back a Better Act. This is Build Back China Better Act. And that's what they're doing. They're helping China.
Yeah, clearly this is an attempt to appease their most radical base. And you can look no further than their climate czar. When President Biden appointed John Kerry, it came out that he flew his private jet to Iceland to collect a global warming award. We checked, there were commercial flights from Boston to Iceland that would have emitted 40 times less carbon than his private jet. And when he was asked about it, he gave this bloviated response about how important he is, and that's why he needs to fly around on private jets while telling other people not to use fossil fuels. And I think that's the hypocrisy that really irritates hardworking families the most, who are paying the price for all these devastating policies. So we're going to continue to talk about things that work to help families to lower emissions and to lower energy prices while creating good jobs here in America. That's what this fight is about. That's why we're strongly opposed to this reconciliation package as a whole, but especially the heat your home taxes, all of the other taxes that would really hit lower and middle income families the hardest. So with that, I want to thank all of my colleagues and all of our friends in industry who are working hard to get the facts out, and for everybody watching, getting the facts and getting the information out is really, really important as they're trying to pass this bill, but they don't yet have the votes. Let's keep it that way. Let's stop this devastating bill from becoming law. Thank you all for joining us.